Hi guys, welcome to part two with the last grade first and the upcoming crossing of Antarctica. My name is John and I'm here with two of the team members, Gareth and Richard.
Hi John, good to talk to you.
Hi John.
Hey guys. So on our previous chat, we just kind of gave an overview to everybody about what it is that you're setting out to do, what the team is that, or the aspects of the team that are involved. And I think today we're just going to touch a bit about where is Antarctica, what is Antarctica about, and what are the climate conditions that you can expect going down there for the upcoming summer season. We all know that climate change is a big thing, and we know that the polar regions are massively affected by that. We see the photographs of the polar bears on the little pieces of ice floating in the ocean, but they're definitely not polar bears in the south, in near Antarctica. Those are found in the north. In the south, we have the penguins. But yeah, can you guys tell us a bit more about how you get there, and what the conditions are like?
So we're going to be flying into Antarctica from South America. So the logistics company that we're working with, Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions, flies into Antarctica from Punta Arenas in Chile. And we're going to be flying into Union Glacier, their base camp in Antarctica. From there, we'll fly across the continent to the edge of the Ross Ice Shelf. And from there, we'll start the expedition. So for the first 700 kilometers of the expedition, we'll be crossing the Ross Ice Shelf. From there, we'll ascend through the Transantarctic Mountains via one of the glaciers up onto the polar plateau. And once we're on the polar plateau, we'll head straight for the South Pole. And from the South Pole, we'll head north again to the edge of the Ronny-Filchner Ice Shelf and the Weddell Sea, and the end of our expedition.
And I guess for a bit of sort of context about what Antarctica is and what sort of conditions we can expect whilst we're there. Essentially Antarctica is it's the seventh great continent. It's a huge mass of land that sits at the bottom of the earth, with the South Pole kind of almost dead center in this vast continent. It's the highest, on average, the highest continent on Earth. It's the coldest continent on Earth, and it's the driest continent on Earth, and it's the windiest continent on Earth. So it's an absolutely amazing place, and there's nowhere else you can really compare it to. And it's also the least populated.
So it's essentially a white desert.
Absolutely, yeah. And it classically gets kind of called the White Desert, and it sits there at the bottom of the world, with almost all of its land surface covered in vast ice caps and ice sheets, with some small mountain ranges around the coast where land actually pokes up through the ice. And it also has these two incredible features that Gareth mentioned. So there's the Ross Ice Shelf and the Ronny-Filchner Ice Shelf. And these are glacial ice. So this is freshwater ice. This is snow that has fallen thousands of years ago, or hundreds to thousands of years ago, over the Antarctic plateau, and has then moved through the glaciers, through the retaining mountains of Antarctica, and come down to sea level, and then started to float out over the ocean. And these are huge features. The Ross Ice Shelf is something like 700 kilometers long, so 700 kilometers from its coast to the land where it originates, and they're permanent features of the continent. They've been there for tens of thousands of years, and they're distinct because they're freshwater ice, compared to the frozen saltwater ice, the sea ice, that contracts and expands with the seasons, rimming the continent of Antarctica. So it's a very important distinction. And essentially, as we start, we'll be starting at sea level on the coast of the Ross Ice Shelf. And there we can expect temperatures to be relatively warm, and maybe sort of -10, a bit colder maybe. And we'll continue along what is a totally dead flat surface for 700 kilometers until the Transantarctic mountains will kind of loom up in front of us. We'll be able to see them for weeks or days before we actually get there. And this is a barrier of mountains with these vast, mighty glaciers spilling out from the central Antarctic plateau. These glaciers are tens of kilometers wide, over 100 kilometers long. And it's one of these glaciers that will travel up through crevasse fields until we reach a height of 2,500, 3,000 meters, where we'll emerge out of these glaciers onto the Antarctic plateau itself. At this point, and this is why Antarctica is on average the highest continent on Earth, because this vast white wilderness sits at the 2,500, 3,000 plus meter level, so relatively high. And at that point, conditions will change. It will become much windier, become much colder, and survival becomes much more difficult once you're on the Antarctic plateau. And then as we cross the next 1,000 plus kilometers across the Antarctic plateau via the South Pole, we'll gradually move back down through the mountains until we hit the Ronnie-Filchner ice shelf, and then we'll be back down to sea level again, and we'll cross that until we get to the opposite coast of Antarctica. One of the other really interesting features about Antarctic climate is the wind, and essentially it's all determined by the cold weather. So you have this incredibly cold polar system that sits over the South Pole, and that cold air spreads out from the pole and blows down over the Antarctic plateau and down over the ice shelf towards the sea. So as you're traveling to the South Pole, the wind is almost always in your face. And as you're traveling away from the South Pole, the wind is almost always behind you. And that's the sort of conditions that we expect to face as we make our journey to and from the South Pole across the Antarctic continent.
Oh, that's amazing. And so obviously it being a white desert and of the coldest recorded temperatures on the planet is there, and the high wind speeds, what type of temperature range are you looking at for the season that you guys are going down in? And then also, I would assume that gets drastically affected by the wind speeds and your wind chill factor.
Yeah, John, so you're absolutely right that the temperature and wind, the two biggest factors that affect the conditions that we'll face. So as you say, it'll be the Antarctic summer, so it'll be light 24 hours a day. The temperatures will be relatively mild compared to the incredibly cold temperatures that you will get during the Antarctic winter. But even at sea level, we'll be experiencing temperatures of between -10 and -20. And then those will be going down to -20 to -30 once we get that altitude and get onto the Antarctic plateau. And those are the still air temperatures. So once you throw wind chill on top of that, and wind chill is really how cold it feels once the wind starts to blow, it strips the heat away from you. So it's a measure of how quickly you lose heat. And once you throw wind chill on top of that, relatively modest winds, 20, 30, 40 kilometers an hour, will drop that temperature significantly. And so if we're up on the polar plateau and it's still air temperature of -20, but we're getting winds of between 50 kilometers an hour and potentially, if we get caught in a storm, 150 kilometers an hour, the wind speed could drop to -50 or even below that.
And it is that it's just that you guys are exposed to those elements, because it's you walking or skiing, in this case skiing, into those weather conditions. Looking at the pole itself, so you guys are obviously skiing across the glaciers up into the Transantarctic mountains and then crossing to the South Pole itself. On your expedition, would that signify the halfway mark as such, or is the halfway mark for the expedition in a other random location across the Antarctica itself?
So the South Pole really will be the halfway point in terms of distance. So it's approximately, from our start point of the South Pole, it's approximately 1,300 kilometers. And then given that the whole journey itself is 2,600 kilometers, from the South Pole to the very edge of the Ronnie-Filchner ice shelf and the Weddell Sea, that's another 1,300 kilometers. So it's pretty much smack bang in the middle. But we're not expecting to get to the South Pole at the halfway point in terms of time. we're expecting the first half of the expedition to take us longer than the second half. So essentially crossing the Ross Ice Shelf, ascending through the Transantarctic Mountains, and then onto the South Pole will be by far the most physically demanding stage of the trip. Our sleds will be at their heaviest. The starting weight is going to be approximately 200 kilos. And then across the Ross Ice Shelf, as Rich mentioned, it's going to be quite a lot warmer, but still extremely cold, quite a lot warmer than up on the polar plateau. So you're looking at, -10 to -15, and deep snow. So snow that's very difficult to drive a sled through. And then once we get to the base of the Transantarctic Mountains, we're planning on navigating a new route, so a new glacier that's never been set foot on by a human before. So negotiating that and navigating our way through crevasse fields that have never been seen before, all the way up while dragging a heavy sled up a steep gradient. All these things add up to making that the first half of the journey, arduous and our progress slower. We're hoping that we'll be able to make up time in the second half of the expedition. As Rich mentioned, when the wind's behind us, our sleds are a little bit lighter. Hopefully we can be doing a few more kilometers a day than in the first half.
Yeah, no, that's amazing, and it's and establishing a new route over and above the fact that the route itself is a route that's never been skied before. It's there are a lot of amazing firsts that the expedition will be taking on, and living up to its name, being the last great first.
Well, and I think that's, it's testament to the fact that Antarctica is still an incredibly wild place. It's easy in the modern era of Zoom meetings and digital satellite mapping to think that humans have kind of been everywhere now, but really Antarctica marks, certainly in terms of the land surface, some of the by far the least explored part of the world, and there are still vast hundreds of kilometers or tens of kilometers wide, 100-kilometer long glaciers through the Transantarctic Mountains, which have barely ever even been flown across in a plane. Never mind actually had a human set foot on them and ascend or descend them. And that element of sort of true exploration, going somewhere that humans have never been before, is an incredibly exciting component of this expedition.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth adding that yes, there are a number of big firsts in this expedition, and we're extremely excited about that, especially as Rich says, that true exploration factor. But we are standing on the shoulders of those that have been before. These parts of our route across Antarctica has been forged by some of the great modern day explorers who we've been talking to, getting as much information from and experience from as we can, studying their expeditions and their kits and their routes, and so we picture ourselves as a continuation of the great work that they've done before, and we just hope to go just a little bit further.
Yeah, and that, I think that led on to what my next question was going to be, was that are you consulting and are you talking to other polar explorers, looking at notes from journals from the bygone eras to try and visualize? Obviously it's one thing training and getting yourself in endurance fit to be able to go and physically haul a pulk across Antarctica, but to be able to visualize the route and to get as much information as you can from journals and from notes and from previous expeditions, that also adds a lot of value to understanding the environment you're going into before you actually find yourselves in that environment.
Yeah, look, I mean, we've been talking to as many people as we can, to get as much knowledge in as we can. Eric Phillips, who he's an extremely well accomplished, decorated polar explorer with, first routes to his name in Antarctica. He's our Antarctic mentor. We've been spending a lot of time and training with Eric. So he's really, been a huge asset to our expedition. And like you say, we've been reading as many expedition reports and journals as we can. Steve Jones from Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions has been, again, instrumental in our preparation. And one really interesting thing he said quite early on in our preparation process was that, Antarctica hasn't changed. The continent, like the way we cross and the way we conduct expeditions has changed, and the gear and the technology, but the continent itself is the same. So if you read those accounts, if you read Scott's diaries, you read Amundsen's diaries, the conditions are the same. The arduous nature of traveling in that extreme environment is the same. So we're using all the resources we have to try and put us in the best position to be successful.
We're just going to add to Gareth by saying that there's a great tradition within the polar community of learning from those who've gone before you. There's a tradition when you've conducted an incredible expedition or done something new, to write about it and to have appendices of your gear lists and your routine and your timetable and some of your other resources that you use, so that people who want to go and do something and learn from those who've gone before have got these resources, and that history goes right back to the golden era and through the modern era as well. And so there's this huge mine of information that's out there, that's been published specifically for people who want to go and try and achieve something incredible in Antarctica, to learn from those who've gone before.
No, it's amazing. I think it also lends the testimony of who those explorers were and what that era was about. That it was not necessarily about trying to be the best and be the first, but it was also about adding value and being able to understand new environments and find new routes and establish an understanding of a new world. So I think and that also leads into, like I said before, this is what this expedition is about. It's about completing a new route, finding new areas that haven't been walked before, skied before, and then also adding immense value, as we'll talk about in later parts of the series, from a research perspective and from a data collecting perspective. I think we leave that for the next part, and I thank you guys for explaining a bit more about the continent of Antarctica and the weather conditions that you guys will be facing and what it's all about.
Thank you, John, and thank you to all those for watching us. And if you like what you're hearing, then please, we'd love you to follow us and be part of our Last Great First community. So please like, share, and subscribe to our newsletter, and we'll see you in the next installment.